Which mobile suits have the absolute highest skill cap? That's the question we're going to go over today. It's a really, a little bit of a weird one, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk through and decide which mobile suits have the absolute highest skill you can obtain on them. Now, just to clarify, this is the complete opposite from skill floors. Skill floors are which mobile suit would have like the highest value just from being okay at it. That's the complete opposite of what we're talking about. So, yeah, let's just jump right into it and figure out which ones have the most skill. Which ones require or which ones have the highest potential skill, right? So, Pale Rider first. It's a really good character, and I like it, and I think it's really excellent and just well made, but it doesn't have the absolute highest skill potential on it. It doesn't have a lot of abilities that are difficult to aim. Like, yes, it has its grenade and its EMP grenade, but they're not really difficult skills to make. Its healing pad has only one real consistent use of just healing people, right? Healing yourself or somebody else behind a corner, not too complex. And its primary fire and its G maneuver are just tracking aim. Yes, aim is difficult, but what you have to keep in mind is nearly every mobile suit has to aim. And the mobile suits that have to aim, with projectiles are actually harder than hit scan, just because it's more difficult to predict things, and you have to predict things on top of doing regular aiming things. So as much as aiming is really difficult and important for Pale Rider, it doesn't raise its potential maximum skill cap up. So that's going to be an important thing. For GM Sniper is also going to get put in the same general category, but it's going to be a bit higher than Pale Rider. It's going to be getting like a low B, high C tier. And yes, again, aiming is difficult, and particularly clicking on heads, is pretty difficult, but there's not so much else in the kit that really changes that. The jump pad doesn't really change anything. The repair gun also doesn't change anything, so that's auto-aimed. And its ultimate just gives it sights, right? Like, yes, the timing of that has some skill for sure. And even characters that aren't that high on skill cap, you can get way value. You get a lot of value for getting skilled in them, but this is like theoretical max kind of stuff we're talking about, right? But the reason it's going to get higher than Pale Rider is partially because of how its aim is more required to go only for headshots, but also because it has worse movement. So because it has worse movement, it can't miss position as much because it'll get punished harder than something like Pale Rider will. Pale Rider has 2 dashes, so it can escape from that. So you're going to kind of see some of these characters are going to get lower skill caps because of the fact that they can escape with more health or with more movement. And other ones, the movement is an asset towards that, but we'll get onto that. So moving on from GM Sniper, we're going to go with Zaku. Zaku is actually going to get an S tier skill cap. Just the way that low HP, but the damage is still required to be really close, and the fact that it has these movement abilities which are required to be used really effectively, and it has the smoke discharger that is, again, about maximizing your value. This character is all about engagement timings, tracking aim, quick bursts of movement, and not allowing yourself to misstep at all. Something that this character has that really neither GM Sniper or Pale Rider have is that its micro movement is going to be extremely, extremely important. So while in May, you're probably looking at me like, well, Don, you just said like more movement equals lower, right? It does kind of, but because of how this movement is necessary to do its attacks, and it's necessary to position, and it's necessary to get closer, it's going to have that's not going to, disproportionately affect it there. Its Heat Hawk also is an ability that can get huge value if used properly. And it also has grenade ability, but it's just all about like very, very distinct, like understanding the macro of the game really well, the major portions, how the game works, understanding engagement timings, understanding target focus, all that kind of stuff, and then continually, putting it out. But then it's all about micro positioning, micro aim, all that sort of stuff. Really, really about positioning. Really important about micro positioning. So this is why I get so high ranked. Turn A Gundam is going to get slightly below GM Sniper. It's basically at the same rank or so, and that's because of it has the advantage for this of having a projectile based weapon as a projectile and hit scan, right? But projectile for its biggest damage, and projectiles are harder to hit. You have to have a higher skill to predict enemies and anticipate what they're going to do to hit them effectively. However, it also has 2 dashes and a self-healing ability and a grappling ability. So while you can use these to get yourself out of sticky situations much more, so you don't have to have this good positioning. The skill cap required for this maximum value or this maximum level is not as it's just skill you don't need to have perfect positioning essentially as much on turning Gundam as you do on like GM Sniper with one of the lowest movement abilities in the whole game. So however, it also is getting a little bit of a buff. Like it's not you know below Pirata or anything, but it's partially because it has the ability to use its grapple aggressively, and that's a whole nother segment of it that it can get a lot of value out of, like become a tank for a temporary moment, like take up and step up in that position and enforce that kind of stuff. So next one, Barbatos. Barbatos is going to get an A value. Again, these close range flankers have very, very high skill caps just because of how the micro movement, just because of how important all the macro stuff is. Like I said, like engagement timings, positioning, really like where you engage from, who you engage on, especially the timing. Like I've been saying, the timing is really, really important. And then timing, like within each fight, you have to, like, it's all dependent on committing to yourself. And when you have low HP and you have to commit, that's why the skill cap is so high, because you get punished for it. And yes, it has 1000 HP, so it's more than Zaku, but considering the fact that it has to brawl, it's still relatively low. This is, like I said, yes, it's busted right now. It's super strong. So that would make you feel like the conversation should be a little bit different, but this is all about theoretical maximum skill caps. So when the numbers get balanced down a little bit and it's more realistic, then it'll be properly in. So it's a little bit of a future discussion for this. For the reason it doesn't get quite as much as Zaku is because it's not aim intensive like Zaku is, and it also isn't as movement and micro movement intensive. It's more macro based because it has one engagement, one slam, one get out, or you know, one mission to get in, hit the target, slam them, longsword them, get out. While Zaku is important to stay and continue the fight and play on little small corners and use cover perfectly and do all the stuff to continue your uptime. Whereas Barbatos only can stay for like a little bit. Like, yeah, you can continue staying there, slapping people around with your mace, but you're not going to get any value out of it, so it's not a valuable thing to do as a skill player. Moving on from that character, though, we have the absolute highest skill cap character in the game, which is Exia. And that is because of how crazy its movement is. It has 5 dashes in its normal form. It has 3 standard dashes, and then it has a regular dash that I can use to get into the air also, and then it has a charged attack dash that stuns and deals damage. Its aim is also arguably one of the most difficult in the game because it starts off as a hit scan, or it starts off as a, it's a projectile, but you have to flick like a projectile, and then you have to track the remaining 2 beam daggers that it'll throw. So it's a really unique aim system and is actually the hardest in the game. Granted, a lot of times you'll just stuff yourself up close to someone, but the further away you can hit it, the more effective it'll be, and the safer you'll be. So, just that crazy level of movement, like the fact that you have so many dash options, perfectly using them. The micro is insane. You also have to do the same sort of thing as Zaku, where you position really, really important microly, and when you ult, you get all your dashes back. So, you know, perfect skill usage of those 5 dashes, and then you pop your ult, you get your dashes available. You'll have 7 because you get an extra one of the leap abilities, and I guess it's actually 6, but you know, you got you're getting a bunch of them back. Like I said, they get full reset, and yeah, they're on a lower cooldown too. No, actually, sorry, it is 7. It is 7 because your spin and slash ability turns into another dash. So I was right, 7. I knew I was right. But it's a whole extra ability, and the cooldowns are low, so you're constantly using them, and you're constantly max valuing them, and yet you're still 800 HP. So the potential to maximize perfect this character is like amazing. And it's also strong, so when really good players get their hands on Exia, they're going to go crazy. It'll be insane. Like, for sure, will be absolutely insane. For RX-78 Gundam, it is going to be getting a higher B tier, if it'll actually move there. And as a side note, these 2 characters are a bit further back. There's a gap here. RX-78 Gundam is, you know, similar to these other characters, and while it does, to the other like hit scan characters, and while it does have a defensive ability with a shield to get itself out of sticky situations, it is closer ranged and it is oriented towards pushing into the enemy. Characters that have to commit their physical body to get maximum value get a higher skill cap. Something like GM Sniper isn't going to get as high of a skill cap as something else because it doesn't have to push. It can just stand from afar and click on things. Therefore, its micro positioning is not important. It's only important if something jumps onto it. And versus RX-78 Gundam, which isn't as high as the other two characters up here, the flankers, the 3 flankers, but it's still at a point where it has to push mid-fight. And it'll have an advantage doing that once the enemy's low, and it'll push in with its shield and with its mace and that sort of thing. But there's like a hefty amount of potential value you can get from knowing when to push, how to push, which cooldowns to use, when to use them, and reading the fight and playing based on how you're reading the fight. On top of the fact that it also has, you know, an aim-based ability, right? That gives it like a solid, normal, standard capability. So, yeah, and also the way the Hyper Hammer works, you can do things like stun people out of ultimates, stun at range, that sort of a thing. So there's a lot of potential in that. Its ultimate also has a very high skill cap just because of how you could potentially use it to influence the enemy team and how it can be broken, so you have to be higher skill with it. Using it, like bouncing it off of walls to get it exactly where it needs to be, hiding it behind corners, knowing like spots that you can land it that it'll still hit everywhere. Potentially, like, you know, there's just lots of things you can do. And that's why it gets such a high, like a solid rating. Versus Pale Rider, that's like a whole rank below it. Now for Mahiro. Mahiro is actually a, let's see, it's a pretty high skill cap character. It's gonna get about the same rating as like RX-78, a bit ahead of RX-78. Not quite necessarily like an A rating, but actually, you know, it's getting like a low A rating just because of the fact that it has projectile aiming that makes it harder to hit, and then it has another like time-based stun that has to activate, which pauses its movement, and it has 800 HP. Its potential to bounce things off the wall with its grenades that bounce is insanely high. It can use that along with its stun ability with perfect usage of its sights that give it information of where the enemy is. There's lots of really cool things. And then it also has its little flip kick ability that allows it to get to high grounds and use space above people to bounce off a wall, access a high ground, know when to do that, exactly when to do that. But yeah, and so because of this way this flip kick ability gets, it also has a sort of engagement based aspect on it, which is like why I said it's about like a low A, but we're gonna put it like at a higher B, just to certify its position higher B, because it also requires it to engage a little bit for maximum value. Maximum value, like knowing where to move to bounce after still maintaining hitting these projectiles constantly. Theoretically, like with his ultimate, with the way that it splits, you could intentionally aim to try and hit multiple enemies with one, like not just throw it into a group, but like specifically aim them and things like that. You could also use these attacks and shoot them up in the air to bounce them properly. So there's lots of really crazy things you can do. Yeah, which is why I keep hovering between A and B. Honestly, I'm putting it back in A. It's A. Sorry guys, but just the fact that you can like literally look up in the sky and spawn and spam and know where it's going to land and be using that effectively is kind of insane. That part's kind of insane. Ashimar is going to get a lower C rating. It's going to be landing it a bit above Pale Rider because while it does have extra mobility, it has the flight ability to save itself if it gets dove. Pale Rider has the healing pad. They have a similar aiming. The burst is more difficult to aim because it's a 3-round burst versus the constant hit scan damage. So that pushes up a little bit, but it's not like projectile or anything. Although it does have a projectile, but you know, that's not the main form of its aiming. And its napalm is really easy to use. Positioning on this character is not super intensive on something like, you know, these flankers or RX-78 Gundam because you don't have to engage. You can, which is why again it's getting in like the high C range, but it's not it's not super it's not necessary, and it's not like high value to do all the time. Yeah, and just so you guys know, the ratings are like they're feeding into each other. A high C, you know, C plus and a B minus are very close. So it's not like these things are huge gaps between. And Guntank's gonna go all the way down here. This okay, I'm sorry guys. This character has the lowest skill cap in the whole game. It has a decent amount of HP, so it can be making more mistakes with its positioning. It also has like charge ability that blocks damage and allows it to back up. It has an auto aim, or has an aim ability that is not auto aimed, of course, but it gives you a large hitbox to aim into. It has a projectile damage ability, but its res isn't super high skill. Like the timing on it is, but like I don't know. Okay, maybe we'll be fair and put it at low C, just because of res timings and deciding when to go in and res and that sort of stuff. But you know what? Actually, I take that back, because every character has to have the capability to res, and other characters it's harder for them to res. So that's not a boon for Guntank. And its ultimate is somewhat difficult, yeah, but just the fact that its aim is so easy and it doesn't like get any special value from its positioning, or really its micro positioning or anything like that, puts it pretty low. So sorry guys. Stormtrooper though, we're gonna put it up around a B, a bit lower than GM Sniper. It's gonna end up, we'll put it underneath GM Sniper. It has, the main reason that it's getting more difficult to aim is because of its projectile weapon. There's a lot of potential with that, with how it aims, and having to, like, it has a slow projectile, so having to hit those properly is a really important part of it, and it's a difficult skill to master. And also, like I said, very high skill cap, right? So that's a large portion of it. It's much harder than hit scan aim, but the fact that it has more HPs is dropping it down a little bit. But the fact that it also has low movement ability, so it's harder, so it has to position better. It actually has the lowest movement ability of any character in the game when it doesn't have its ultimate. So yeah, because even like GM Sniper has a jump pad. So yeah, very, very low on that. I guess Unicorn Gundam also. No, Unicorn Gundam has 2 dashes. So its ultimate though does buff it up a bit, because the timing on that and how you use it to push or defend is very specific, and there's lots of important things you can do with it. But yeah, so that's why it's getting in like towards about this range. Sazabi is going to be put up in a high tier rating, just because of the fact that it's constantly having to engage. It also has a high skill floor, I would say, because of its shield, but being the focus of all the damage, being the focus of stuns, only having one true movement ability, its other dash ability having to play off of other positioning of people, and the fact that it has, you know, like a ranged projectile to throw, is really important. Like, the thing about these sort of characters is, because you're the main focus, every like micro tiny position you make is incredibly important. You're right in the face of enemies all the time. If you peek at slightly the wrong time, you get blown up by an RX-78 hammer. If you don't predict it perfectly, you get hit by it. Whereas other characters are usually gonna be in the back. And the thing is, this is a Sazabi's reality, like, all the time. Obviously its aim isn't too difficult, but having to position and get yourself into that is difficult if you're doing it properly. A large portion really of it is about engagement timing. Like Sazabi, you have to understand these characters, Sazabi, Sword of Marasai, and the new Melee Zaku, they play a different game to an extent. They essentially are playing chess while everyone else is playing an FPS for the most part. It's very similar because they're main tank characters. And while yes, really they're more like playing FPS chess, what I've defined I do believe there's roles in the game, and I know people don't really like the idea of that because they think it's part of why Overwatch died, but it's not. And I made a whole video on that if you guys want to watch it. Though I do believe having these super strict roles with super strict hard counters is bad for the game. I don't want it, which is why I like this game. But every character in this game has a role. Like, you know, they're like a main tank, they're like an off tank, they're a hit scan DPS, they're a flanker, whatever. But it's like they have 2 roles essentially. And so every character is a damage character. So like Sazabi is a main tank / DPS. GM is like a main tank / support. Or sorry, not main tank. It's a DPS / support. So that's the way of looking at the game. But for Sazabi, it's all about when you push and control. So you're playing chess, right? So if just the regular things, people are looking at it like, well, okay, you don't have that much movement, so there's not a lot of skill there. You have a shield, you have a lot of health. That doesn't seem very high skill to me, but it's because of the role that it has to play, where it has to play chess. It has to micro and macro scale the game so much, particularly with macro. You have to know everything that's going on. You need to be counting all the cooldowns that are being thrown. You need to be knowing exactly what you can push, when you can push it, and you get punished so much more for what happens based on this stuff, but you also get a lot more value based on this thing. Because say, for example, like a GM sniper knows all this stuff and then pushes when it has an advantage, it doesn't like it pushing or not pushing doesn't really change its ability to click on a head as well. It doesn't really change like that potential skill cap, right? Whereas with a Sazabi, it's everything. So like I said, you're playing chess, you're playing FPS chess, you are a DPS chess player, and so you are all up in your brain, knowing everything, maximizing everything, min-maxing your shield, min-maxing your ammo, all that stuff. So that's why it gets a really high rating. And the Zaku, melee Zaku is going to be the same. It's actually going to be, a bit harder than the Sazabi, I would say. And like, to be fair, I do kind of want to say that because of the fact that these 2 characters are playing chess, you almost don't want to put them on the same scale. So if I like haven't compared them completely well to like Barbatos and this guy next to him, you know, like honestly, they kind of deserve to be on their own little thing. So it's a little bit hard to talk about them, but comparing these 2 with each other, just the fact that it doesn't have a shield, and it has to be constantly like maintaining this rage gauge, and it has lower HP, raise its skill cap a lot. The fact that it has more movement abilities decreases it, just because that it gives it more forgiving positioning and that sort of thing. It's hard to explain these things, but it's the same sort of thing with Sazabi. It's all about when to push, controlling the flow of the game, knowing what cooldowns they have available, knowing how much HP they have, knowing how far you can push your character maximally, and having to base your positioning on that entirely is really, really, really high skill cap. That's why it gets pushed up also like towards an A range. Honestly, I think Barbatos needs to go down. Whatever. We'll leave it. This is like a balanced Barbatos. You know, that's fair. Balanced Barbatos A, current Barbatos, no. But Marasai is also similar. It's honestly, it's like a DPS. If these are like main tank DPSs, this is a DPS main tank that's also an off tank. So it's also getting up in the A range, just because, not primarily because of the main tank stuff, because it doesn't have to engage as often, because it's not a close range character. It doesn't have to force itself into certain positions as much and be vulnerable to that experience, but it still controls the space, so it's still playing chess a lot. And on the other hand, it doesn't have a shield, has decent mobility, but the thing that really determines why it gets such a high skill cap is because of how the movement works in relation to the hook. There's crazy level of stuff you can do with that hook. I'll probably make a whole video on it eventually. I didn't talk about it in my Marasai guide, but when you hook somebody, you can continue moving and you can continue dashing, and that influences their positioning. So having this and knowing exactly when to do it and when to use your beam blade to like push them away and get the damage on them, and min-maxing that, because as soon as you hook someone, if you beam blade, it'll hit them at absolute max range at the end of the cooldown. So you can do that kind of stuff, but in addition to you hitting 2 dashes and you're using it to position and then like beam blade someone off the map, like pulling them around corners. Maybe you hook someone and you dash forward and then dash back to drag them around a corner. Like, there's crazy levels of things you can do on this character. Like the potential skill cap on this character is insane. You know, not as high as X, yeah, but absolutely insane. And that's from a mechanical perspective. But just because of the fact that it doesn't have to engage as much as Sazabi and this little melee Zaku here, it's not quite as high. Metis. Metis is going to get a high C tier. The reason is most of its movement actually it's gonna get a decently high C tier. And I know people are looking at this and like, oh, this character, Mercy has a really low skill cap in Overwatch. I kind of get what you're saying, you know, because there's no aim involved and it's all movement. But with Metis, the beam isn't as long in this game as it is in Overwatch, and it breaks way easier. So your positioning is really even more than everything. Before, your positioning wasn't just like, based on surviving, because in Overwatch it's just survive, don't get killed. You can heal anyone from anywhere basically, you know, just jiggle peek around the corner to make sure the beam is continuing to go through it. But on Metis it doesn't work like that, and it breaks way easier, and so you have a shorter thing. And just because of the fact that you have to position perfectly, because if you're not constantly healing things that are damaged, you're losing uptime. Balancing that and balancing your own life, just balancing being the perfect position heal versus your likelihood of dying is really, really high. Has also projectile aim on it. So, you know, actually we're putting it, actually I'm gonna move it up. It definitely deserves to be a little bit up. I was wrong about that. I'm thinking high B tier, to be honest. Like, just thinking about that, and thinking about how much like your positioning is not just about surviving like it is in Overwatch with Mercy, and now it's really just about like absolutely maximizing and trading your life for someone else's health pool potentially. Then your aim is difficult too with projectiles. Granted, like, you know, you have an auto aim turret and whatever, and you have a flight ability to save yourself if you get jumped, but you're also low HP. So we're pushing it up there just because of how, as much as you do have the ability to escape, you have low HP, and if you do miss position, you'll just die. So hot take of the day, guys. Unicorn Gundam, well, you know, it's still gonna get a pretty low rating. Its aim is fine. It's a tracking based weapon. It's more forgiving than other things. It has area of effect healing abilities. They're not particularly, you know, hard to hit or anything. Like, yes, the ranges on them are small, which is why it's still getting a decent, like, or like, you know, yes, it's hard to hit the healing, but the healing isn't that substantial that you're in the same sort of mental state where it's like, oh, I need to be trading my life for this sort of stuff. You're not going to be like, oh, let's go stand out in the open to give my Sazabi an extra 30 healing per second. No, you don't do that. And so your team will just be orienting themselves around you in general. The, you know, the tracking funnel ability, whether it tracks exactly with following the mouse or following the target, it's, you know, it's got some potential, but it's not anything too crazy. It doesn't do a bunch of damage. It isn't going to change so much about this character. You're not really gonna be able to hit it from range anyway. So it's just about spamming it into someone that jumps on you. The ultimate is not very high skill cap. It's a big cylinder of death, bro. It goes through things too. Like, I think if you put it right next to an edge, it'll like go through the edge, basically. I had to work out the exact specifics on that though. So not too high for Unicorn. Good character and excited for it. But yeah, like, I don't know. And the armor is just like, just pre-pack before the fight. Use it as soon as you get it. You know, it's not anything too crazy, too complex. GM though, GM is also a healer, but it's going to get basically towards an RX-78 rating. A little bit lower though, just because of the fact that it's a healer, but it's also kind of an off tank, right? And you do have very low HP, so if you get punished, if you get stunned at all, you're dead. If, you know, you do have a shield, so you can do some things, but just by the fact of you still having to play like this chess mentality, but not the same because you're not a main tank, so you don't like actually frontline, and you have some range, does change a lot of things. Knowing how to set up your C4, when to set up your C4, the ability to maximally use your grenade is kind of crazy just because it's really slow. So if you could like predict when your teammates are going to do things and predict where they're going to go and then use it, that's really high skill cap, because this is like objectively the hardest projectile to hit in the game, really, based on this sort of stuff, right? Just because of its like, you could throw it and hit it perfect and then someone dodges and they just, you know, I mean, maybe it's not the hardest projectile to hit, but it's you know, it's a single cooldown, so it's really important. But yeah, and really, since it's an enforcer character like RX-78 Gundam is, you do have to push with it a lot, and so you have to do these same sort of things where it's like you're playing, and they're like, oh, that's a trigger, I need to go in. Like, their odds if he's low, it's time to push him, right? Using your bash aggressively, knowing how to get your C4 in potentially even an aggressive fight is really powerful. The nades its ultimate is also really high skill cap, just because of the fact that you can throw it higher to spread it out. You can throw it on top of things. You could use it to throw it behind the enemy to force them forward, throw it in front of them to force them back, throw it in the middle, try and frag, use it to deny an area. There's some crazy things that you can do. Use it to bait people into you. Like, there's some really high things you can do. But since it has a shield and it's not a main, it's not like actually frontline, it's getting like a B. Looking for some more Gundam Evolution content? Then make sure to check out these 14 mobile suit guides I did. In them, I go over the abilities of the characters, the strengths and weaknesses, when to play them, and how to play them. I go really in depth, and I think the videos are really good, so you guys should go check them out. Thank you.